Hello everyone, welcome to Books Mandala's YouTube channel. In this channel, we talk about everything and anything related to books. Pride and Prejudice is an 1813 novel by the English author Jane Austen. The novel follows our protagonist, Elizabeth Bennet, on her character development, who learns about the consequences of hasty judgments and begins to appreciate the goodness in one's heart over superficiality. Pride and Prejudice is one of the most celebrated bodies of work in world literature. With over 20 million copies sold to date, the book constantly appears at the top of most best books list. The memorable characters and the themes of the novel are widely loved and praised by scholars and readers worldwide. The residents of Longbourn are thrilled to hear the news that Charles Bingley, a rich single man, has moved to the nearby Netherfield estate, especially Mrs. Bennet, who hopes to marry one of her 5 daughters to him, from oldest to youngest, Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. The Bennets attend a ball at which Mr. Bingley is present. The daughters are all impressed by his outgoing personality and his friendly disposition. Mr. Bingley spends much of the evening dancing with Jane Bennet. Mr. Bingley's friend, Fitzwilliam Darcy, is also present at the venue. He seems too proud to speak to any of the locals and even refuses to dance with Elizabeth Bennet. This makes everyone view him as arrogant and obnoxious. At social events over subsequent weeks, however, Mr. Darcy finds himself increasingly attracted to Elizabeth's charms and intelligence. Bingley and Jane's friendship continues to flourish, but Mr. Bingley's sisters do not approve of Jane as a wife for Bingley because of her mother's lower social status. Darcy also opposes the relationship, thinking that Jane is not serious about Bingley. One day, on her way to the Bingley mansion, Jane is caught in a downpour and turns ill. This forces her to stay at Netherfield for several days. Elizabeth hikes through muddy fields to Netherfield to tend to Jane. When she arrives there, her dress is mud-spattered and dirty. Miss Bingley, Charles' snobbish sister, immediately dislikes her. She also notices that Darcy has started paying quite a bit of attention to Elizabeth. Out of jealousy, Miss Bingley's spite towards Elizabeth grows further. Sometime later, Elizabeth and Jane return home. They find Mr. Colin, Mr. Bennet's cousin, visiting their household. He is a young clergyman who will inherit Mr. Bennet's estate after he dies because of a legal stricture known as an entail. He is also fascinated by the Bennet daughters, so much so that he makes a marriage proposal to Elizabeth shortly after his arrival. She turns him down, wounding his pride, and he quickly turns his attention to Elizabeth's friend, Charlotte Lucas, who wants to marry for security rather than love. The two are soon engaged and married. As Darcy grows more interested in Elizabeth, Elizabeth continues to despise him and is attracted to George Wickham, a handsome and personable militia officer. Wickham tells Darcy that his father used to work for Darcy's father and that he and Darcy grew up together. Wickham claims that Darcy's father favored him over Darcy and had promised him a permanent position as a salaryman. But after his death, Darcy kicked him out of his bequest, hence making his life miserable. Elizabeth believes Wickham's account without question, disliking Darcy even more because of it. Much to Jane's dismay, at the beginning of winter, the Bingleys and Darcy leave Netherfield for London unexpectedly. Mr. Bingley's sister writes to Jane that they do not intend to return. She also mentions Darcy's sister, Georgiana, as a potential suitor for Mr. Bingley. Jane quietly accepts life without Bingley, but Elizabeth is angry for her sister. She suspects that Bingley's sisters and Darcy are trying to keep Bingley away from Jane. That spring, Elizabeth visits Charlotte at her new home in Hunsford, Kent, and meets Mr. Collins's patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Lady Catherine is also Darcy's aunt. She is an overbearing lady who thrives in meddling in other people's lives. Soon after Elizabeth's arrival in Kent, Darcy pays a visit to his aunt with his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam. Darcy confuses Elizabeth with his behavior. He seems to want her company, but never says much. But one day he makes a shocking proposal of marriage, which Elizabeth quickly refuses. She tells Darcy that she considers him arrogant and unpleasant. She also scolds him for trying to keep Bingley away from Jane and disinheriting Wickham. Darcy leaves her shortly but delivers a letter to her the next day. In this letter, he admits that he influenced Bingley away from Jane, but claims that he only did so because he thought their romance wasn't serious. As for the case with Wickham, Darcy explains that Wickham is a liar and the real cause for their disagreement was because of Wickham's attempt to elope with his young sister, Georgiana Darcy. Elizabeth is mortified at this discovery and regrets how her own pride prejudiced her against Darcy. A few months later, Elizabeth goes on a trip with her aunt and uncle Gardner to Derbyshire County. Here they visit Pemberley, Darcy's estate, but only after making sure that Darcy is away. She is delighted at the estate and the property. She is also impressed while hearing from Darcy's servants that he is a kind and generous master. Just then, Darcy arrives unexpectedly. Elizabeth is surprised at how graciously he treats his guests. He entertains the Gardners and invites Elizabeth to meet his sister. He also invites her over to Pemberley for dinner. Elizabeth begins to develop feelings for Darcy, and Darcy too is in love with Elizabeth. In the midst of this, Elizabeth receives two letters from Jane telling her that Lydia has eloped with Wickham and that the couple is nowhere to be found. Out of fear of the disgrace to her entire family, Elizabeth and the Gardners leave for home immediately. Mr. Gardner and Mr. Bennet go off to search for Lydia. Mr. Bennet returns home empty handed. Just when everyone is hopeless, Mr. Gardner finds the couple and explains that Wickham has agreed to marry Lydia in exchange for an annual income. The Bennets believe that Mr. Gardner has paid Wickham to agree to the wedding. After the wedding, though, Elizabeth discovers that it was Darcy who convinced Wickham of the marriage, thereby saving the reputation of the Bennets. Shortly thereafter, Bingley returns to Netherfield and continues pursuing Jane. Darcy goes to stay with him and pays occasional visits to the Bennets, but makes no mention of his desire to marry Elizabeth. Bingley soon makes a marriage proposal to Jane, which Jane, of course, accepts. The family's happiness and celebration are interrupted by a visit from Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She had heard a rumor that Darcy and Elizabeth were a couple, which they're not. Since she does not consider a Bennet girl to be a suitable match for Darcy, Lady Catherine demands that Elizabeth promise not to accept any proposal from Darcy. Elizabeth refuses, saying that she is not engaged to Darcy, but she will make no promise of the sort. A little later, Elizabeth and Darcy go out walking together, and he tells her that his feelings have not changed since the spring. He proposes again, and Elizabeth tenderly accepts his proposal. Initially, Elizabeth has difficulty in convincing her father that she is marrying for love, not position and wealth, but Mr. Bennet is convinced at last and is incredibly happy at the match. The novel concludes with an overview of marriage and of the three Bennet daughters and the great satisfaction of everyone involved.
Thank you for watching the video. We hope you find this summary useful. You can purchase this book from booksmandala.com. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to our channel for more bookish content.